Hey, welcome back for another episode of the Speak Life podcast. This week, I'm excited to have another conversation, a follow-up conversation with Jim Misloski, the Developing Leaders Director for the Missouri Baptist Convention. Last time, as we went through and talked about volunteers and the need to work with volunteers well, and fighting against the myth that pastors just need to get better and better at doing more and more. We had a conversation afterward talking about the need to really understand how things get done and just kind of how God has wired us to do the things that need to get done. And so we have a conversation about some useful tools, some useful assessments that are out there to help pastors to get their head wrapped around that, just some ways of thinking to help you process how to conceptualize how things need to get done in the church, and some actual, practical pathways to do some of that assessment. Welcome back to the Speak Life podcast. Hey, welcome back for another episode of the Speak Life podcast. This week I've got Jim Misloski back with me, the Developing Leaders Director for the Missouri Baptist Convention. Jim, last time we talked, we kind of left off with, we'd been talking about volunteers and the needs for pastors to work well with volunteers. And we'd been talking about this kind of myth that's out there about pastors needing to get better and better at doing more and more. Mm-hmm. And then we ended up having a conversation afterward about how to think through how stuff gets done and what maybe goes along with bringing on board volunteers. And we ended up talking about a couple of different, assessments and just, I guess, ways of understanding volunteers and work at the same time. So why don't you jump in a little bit there? You were just talking a second ago before I hit record about, means of assessment and the needs of assessment. Let's just kind of jump in.
Yeah. So, I think when we're talking about working with volunteers and recruiting volunteers, and I don't know how much we talked about this last time, but the biggest idea, I think, the like kind of two mindsets when we're thinking about recruiting and working with volunteers. First, recruiting, we always want to recruit out of vision and not need. What most happens, right, is the big call from the front that says, hey, like, man, we got a bunch of kids, everybody's having babies, and we just need children's workers. They're getting tired. And, you get that, we need you kind of thing. And volunteers don't respond to that. Most likely they've been burned by it before when they got invited to do something. The job description, the time frame wasn't really clear, and they said yes because they wanted to serve the Lord with their gifts. You got in there. The people that were tired quit, and they got stuck with it, and they're still and they're like, I'm never saying yes again. Right?
Yeah.
And so it's so critical to recruit volunteers based on vision, right? We're raising the next generation of disciples. Do you want to be a part of that? With joy and passion, and let your volunteers speak to why they do what they do, right? So you recruit people on vision, and you give them clear, here's what we need you to do, really specific job descriptions that are doable, sustainable, and for how long. We need you for 6 months, we need you for a year, and then you honor that, right? So that recruiting is really important. There's a culture there that matters. But then when we talk about working with volunteers, this whole idea of how each of us is made, where the Lord has given his church what it needs, right? And so our church, when we look out there, there's an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset. Most of us have a scarcity mindset, right?
Yeah.
It's like, my church doesn't have any leaders. It's just me. Right. I don't see anybody out there, because what we see, this is really a sad thing to say, we see other people as just flawed versions of ourselves. And so we're like, we look for, because we know what we're doing, and we want people that can do it like we do it. And so we don't see versions. So instead of seeing people as very unique creations knit in their mother's womb with gifts and strengths and limitations that can be used for a part of a job. Like we just don't see the leaders there, right? So moving from that scarcity mindset, like we don't have what we need, to, okay, maybe we're short on resources, but this is the Lord's church, and he creates something out of nothing. Like he still does that.
Yeah.
He's that God that creates something out of nothing. Our church is full of what it needs. So that mindset's really, really important.
Yeah, like even as you, right before you brought it up, and it probably ties back to a little bit to the last time we talked. I was thinking about scarcity mindset in, that idea of how we work with volunteers, the idea of giving a time frame. I need you for the next 3 months, 6 months, a year. If we're coming from a background of I only have a few people who are going to volunteer, the old 90% of the work gets done by 10% of the people kind of mindset,
Yeah.
then why on earth would I ever put a time frame? Because they're gonna be done, and I'm gonna have to go back on my word because nobody else is gonna volunteer. They're part of
Right.
the 10%. So there's that kind of idea that goes along with it. That again, like you
Yeah.
said, loses sight of the fact that this is God's church. He cares about it and cares about her and her success more than you do, Pastor, and is better at enabling that success than you are. And so he's going to provide.
Right. And to believe that, so what most of us have this framework in our head that we're not aware of, where we go from being a learner to a leader, right?
Mm.
And when you get to leader, you've arrived. And really, because we have this picture of a leader, we're in charge, we're directing. That's really just the middle step, because we go from learner to leader to multiplier. And we've got to learn how we've got to learn how to be multipliers. I like to use that word, one, because other people have used it really effectively. There's a book I recommend for every leader like First, and it's called Multipliers. It's by Liz Wiseman. She's just a business book, but she's done a better job than anybody I've seen at helping us think through that mindset. She actually talks about, I learned that mindset from her in her book, Scarcity versus Abundance. She talks about that really well. But she also helps us identify the diminisher in us and the multiplier. There are tendencies that we all have, different ones that shut people down or diminish them in their role. And then there's tendencies we have that actually energize them and light them up. And in the church scenario, especially, invite other people to become a part of it, right? Because if you lead your volunteers well, part of their job description is bringing a friend along to do it with them. Do a small, like, hey, come with me this Sunday and see what I do. Like, this is all I'd love you to, I need a buddy, right? So even when you're recruiting volunteers, you say, hey, be praying about somebody the Lord might want you to invite into this. And it might not even be somebody in your church, right? It might be a friend, a neighbor, a coworker that says, hey, I'm doing cookies this weekend for my class. Would you like come help me bake them? And it would be great if you came with me and helped me serve them, right? That's the multiplier effect that we really want to become a part of things. And here's what's crazy about Liz Wiseman's book. There's an assessment in there. If you buy the book, comes with an assessment. It's got a bunch of free stuff. The assessment's free. It helps you see like what your diminisher tendencies are and how to work on them, and what your multiplier tendencies are. It's a great book for working with volunteers. And I've not seen an assessment that helps that you want to use to develop people, right? It doesn't say, here's how you are and here's how you're always going to be.
Yeah.
It says, here's a place where you're weak in working with people, and here's a place where you're strong. And we need to work on these diminishing tendencies, because people are leaving your thing because you do this. Like I remember, I don't know if you want me to go into this, but
go for it.
When I took the assessment the first time, like, you can tell I'm kind of a gregarious guy, like with people. I just want to encourage them. Like, you're doing a great job. And the assessment showed, like, there are people that are doers, that get stuff done, and they love working hard, right? There's something about the way they're wired. They just love getting their nose to the grindstone and keeping it there and getting stuff done, right?
Yeah.
When somebody like me, because I'm not one of those people, I'm, I'm a, when you talk about that later, I just love encouraging people. When I come along to somebody like that, my encouragement sounds like hype to them.
Yeah.
It doesn't, they don't see it. And mine is totally authentic, but it doesn't feel like that to them. What they need,
Yeah.
they need me to recognize how hard their job is and how hard they've been working. And I didn't realize that. And
Yeah.
when I saw this, I was like, oh, that's why this guy, that like, we don't get along very well. And it was such a big thing for me to realize. I got to go to this guy and said, dude, I can't, like, you're working so hard and your work is really hard. Like, to get in there and really see it with him and authentically say, dude, like, how do you work so hard?
Yeah.
Where do you find the drive to do this? Even when you're running into the obstacles and the barriers that you are overcoming, how do you do that? That's all he needed to hear. And
Yeah.
it was like so mind blowing for me to see that effect.
Yeah. So as I'm listening to you describe that, it's bringing a couple things to mind. Number one, the idea of I'm kind of going back to some of the stuff that I think. Gosh, it's not Covey. It's Jim Collins in Good to Great is the one
Yeah. Oh
who
yeah.
talks about it. The idea of getting people not just on the right people on the bus, but getting the right people in the right seat on the
Yeah.
bus. And what goes along with that is a sense of assessment, knowing who people
Mhm.
are, where they are, and helping them to know kind of how they function. Because as you know those things, like you just said, when you start to recognize, okay, for me, I'm big on encouraging and I'm big on you know getting people moving forward and getting people on board with the idea.
Mhm.
But for the person who is really about the work, they hear it as hype, frankly, in part because they just don't need that. It's not
Mhm.
where they are. It's the way they're wired doesn't require the
Yeah.
extra encouragement. They just want to get it done and they see value in, nose to the grindstone and getting across the finish line.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurs to me is just the overlap I'm hearing with um, it sounds like Multipliers was a big kind of paradigm shifting, eye opening book for you. Uh, Pat Lencioni's Working Genius was that kind of book for
Mhm.
me. And there's an assessment that goes with that as well, which is not free.
Right.
That one runs about $25 a
Uh-huh.
pop. But
Well worth it though.
yeah, yeah, it is well worth it. And there's a value in um, just gaining that kind of understanding about yourself and about those around you, because
Yeah.
it helps you see how you can not only function better on your own, it helps you see how your team can function well moving
Mm.
forward.
Yeah, and so that's where so like when you bring that up, Lencioni's, it's called Widget,
Hmm.
right? That's and it's got a six kind of
Yeah.
person, like it's got those parts in it. We started using one that's free. It's called the VOPS, and it identifies a visionary, operator, a processor, and a synergist. And it's done by Les McCowan. He's got this great, I don't know if it's Irish or Welsh or Scottish brogue, but he's a business guy that wrote a book called Predictable Success. Totally worth the read. But he does this assessment, and it's free. You can go online and go to predictablesuccess.com. I think that's where you'll find it, and look for his VOPS. It's a free online thing. We love it because it's really quick.
Yeah.
Somebody can take it, it's just like super short, and it just lets you know your VOPS. Lencioni's widget is a little bit more thorough,
Yeah.
and it costs a little bit, but we use both of those. When we're hiring somebody, that's a critical. Those are two assessments. You can do them online, so people don't have to come in and take it. You can pay for their $25
Hmm.
widget and do the free thing, and we've found it very reliable in confirming, like, because we're interviewing people, you know what position we're filling. We know the strengths this position needs to have,
Yeah.
and that VOPS and the widget are really helpful. And so even whether we're hiring, because when I work, I do convention work. It's a really good affirmer of that. But when you're working with volunteers, it's a great tool, especially if you want to do one for free. The VOPS is great, lets you know what you're getting in a person. Those are great when it comes to hiring um,
Yeah.
or recruiting.
So with VOPS, it sounds like it helps you to identify just kind of your main approach to doing things and getting things done, and
Hmm.
where your strengths are. Is that
Yeah, and
what those
so
different titles are?
yeah, so like me, I'm mostly a visionary and a huge synergist, right? So actually, mostly a synergist and like a lot of visionary. I'm not an operator and I'm not a processor. Operator are people that they like systems, they get stuff done, they're really good. Processors are discerning and judge, like they're just really good at doing that kind of stuff. I love to cast big visions and then get everybody to go say, let's go, and get
Yeah.
like, I know how to, really diplomatic. I know how to help people, get over conflict, that kind of stuff. That just comes naturally to me, right?
Okay.
That's what it helps like, because if you're hiring somebody that like you need somebody that can really crank out the work, you want to know that they score high as an operator, right?
Yeah.
Like they're driven by getting things done. Um,
Yeah. At the
or,
same time that, and this goes back to a little bit of what we talked about, the pastor needing to get better and better at doing more and more that myth. If, for example, we're talking about a pastor who is, not strong on visionary, maybe they are
Mhm.
strong on processor, and maybe they're strong on operator, but they're not good at thinking big picture and thinking about what could potentially come down the line. Um, as they're looking at volunteers, just even without them taking the inventory necessarily, just be thinking in those kinds of terms.
Yeah,
This is the place where I'm weak. Who do I have around me that's good at this that I can bring on board? And, to an extent, maybe they can help me to grow in that area, but also to an extent, maybe they can own that area. Uh,
I think this is a big thing when it comes to pastoral care and pastoral resilience, is
yeah.
understanding that the pastoral role in scripture, we see three words that describe the same position, right? We have the bishop, the elder, and the shepherd
Hmm.
pastor, right? Those aren't three different people. Those are three functions that the pastoral office has to deliver to the congregation, right? Because the shepherd obviously is feeding and loving and caring for the flock.
Yep.
The bishop is the overseer's administrative kind of sort, and that elder is like a leader. That's where often you find the visionary kind of thing.
Yeah.
And as you're a pastor, knowing very few, they did research, only 2% of pastors are strong in all three of those areas. We're just
Yeah.
we're not made, like, we're made to do this as a team, right? And so praying that, like, if you're going to ask volunteers, hey, as you do this role, I think you're right for it, pray that somebody else would come along. You as a pastor, you ought to be praying for other pastoral leaders in your church for God to reveal them. Because, and
Yeah.
we think a pastor is a guy that has to be paid. We have multiple deacons, none of them are paid, and we expect a lot of work out of them.
Yeah.
Why don't we do the same thing as a pastor? Why
Yeah. Well,
why don't we do the multiple pastor thing and find those guys that like are really good elders? Sometimes they're frustrated deacons, right? The only
yeah.
the only position they had because they're a working guy and deacon is what they do, but they're the ones that are always going, man, we got to be pay attention to people and where they are spiritually, and we need to pray for them. Like that starts to sound like a shepherd more than a deacon that's like, let's get stuff done, let's solve this problem, let's figure out what's
Yeah.
going on in the church.
Well, and I can easily see scenarios like uh, where maybe I've got a woman in my church who has a really strong vision for one area of
Yeah.
ministry. Maybe she's got a really strong vision for uh, reaching out to those who are hurting and have experienced loss, and or maybe a
Mm,
really strong vision for what children's ministry ought to look like. And then maybe have somebody else who has a really strong vision for what a college ministry could look like if you happen to be in a college town. I mean, it doesn't have to be one person coming up with all of the vision for everything, right? I mean, this is where you have the opportunity to really connect with uh, your members and nurture what God has,
oh
what God
man,
is doing in them.
I man, Bill, I think you're hitting on something that's so critical in terms of this abundance mindset, to know that Scripture tells us He's gifted the church with everything it needs.
Yeah,
And if we're leading the church and we're believing a lie, if we don't think there's any leaders in our church or any people in there that, like, they're there, right?
yeah,
And I don't think there's any greater joy for me to see, to look, like, as a pastor, to look at people and think, okay, Lord, what did, when you knit them in their womb, what was your idea? Because that person is God's idea, right? It wasn't their
yeah,
parents' idea. Their parent had an idea that they wanted to have kids, but He's the one that knit them in their mother's womb. He
yeah,
had an idea for me and for you and everybody. And and that's the other mindset shift I think as pastors we have to make, is from being task oriented to people oriented.
yeah,
Because a lot of us we're good, we start out getting what we're doing because we're good at it, but that's where we have to move from leader to multiplier. That's the difference between classic idea of a leader who's like directing things, to a multiplier who sees every problem, every crisis, everything as an opportunity to make a disciple or develop a leader,
yeah,
right? And to see people like you ask that question, Lord, what did you do in them, and what do you have them here for, and how can I find that and set them free to do that?
yeah,
That's like, oh, that's
yeah.
when you just get to watch God be great in your church. No matter what size church, context, wherever you're at, right? They
Yep.
are they're there. This is Jesus's church. He's in the middle of it. He's crazy about it, and He has done amazing things already.
Yeah. Uh, with that being said, it's still, so I'm still going back to, we talked about the VOPS model. We didn't
Yeah.
talk a whole lot about the working genius, that
Yeah,
widget
talk about it, because
model.
it's got some more complete ideas about how people are shaped and what
Yeah.
God did when He made them, right?
Right. And it's interesting the way that Lencioni talks about it. He describes it as, this is 80% about productivity and how stuff happens. It's about 20% about personality. And so the idea that this is describing some things about how you're designed, how you tend to function, what naturally comes out of you, and naturally you find engaging. But it's also just describing work and how work tends to happen. And that widget model is actually, so it's six different ideas, but they descend in terms of elevation, if I can put it like that. The idea of up at that top level, this is where the more visionary side of things happens. The
Mhm.
top level is wonder. So the W in widget,
Yeah.
I'm just going to list them out and then I'll explain what
Yeah,
they are.
let's
So
do it.
widget stands for wonder, invention, discernment, galvanizing, enablement, and tenacity. And so those top two, wonder and invention, have to do with that kind of top tier visionary view, the 30,000 foot view. What are the things that we need to be about? What are the things that we need to include in what we're doing? What are the things we need to be thinking about for the next couple of years? Stuff like that. And then invention is beginning to come up with the practical ideas to implement that.
Mhm.
I kind of think of the idea of brainstorming, right? So those
Yeah.
people who are really good at seeing the big picture and coming up with ideas uh, for what works in the big
Mhm.
picture. And I don't think you have to have one person that's good at both of those things. In
Mm-mm.
fact, I wonder is one of my top ones. Invention is not one of my top ones. It's down a little
Mhm.
lower for me. And so that's that kind of top view. Well, the next level down is discernment, and then galvanizing. And so discernment is looking at all those ideas that were come up with an invention, and now starting to analyze what's going to work, or where would this be a problem if we tried to implement this and it would be a challenge. It's coming down to a little bit lower view, right? We're not up at 30,000 feet now. We're coming down to earth a little bit more, and we're starting
Yeah.
to analyze what might work. And then once we've selected what might work, now we're starting to bring people on board. And so it sounds like we're moving from, in the VOPS model, from processor to synergist a little bit, right?
Hmm.
We're moving
Yeah.
from analyzing those ideas, which discernment is my highest one. So discernment and wonder are my top two. And so being able to analyze some of those ideas, and then moving into, once that's done, moving into galvanizing, getting people jazzed about the idea, getting people on board. The last two are now, okay, so we've dreamed the big dream. We've come up with some ideas. We've narrowed down to an idea that might work, and we're all on board now with the same vision.
Hmm.
Now we have to actually get the stuff done. And so
Yeah.
enablement is about volunteering and bringing in volunteers and actually beginning the work. Tenacity is about having it cross the finish line. And so this is where our operators are,
Yeah.
right? If we use that other idea. And so understanding, and this is part of what was most beneficial to me in the understanding of that widget model. We're typically really good at two of them. And so you were talking earlier about these different ideas, and there are maybe 2% of pastors that are three things all really well, with bishop and
Right.
elder and shepherd. That when it comes to these 6 types of working genius, there are 2 that typically emerge as our geniuses, the ones that we're best at.
Yeah.
On the opposite end, there are 2 that typically emerge as our frustrations. Like, this is just not where I want to spend my life. Like, for
Yeah.
me, and I knew it as I was listening to it, the audiobook for the first time before I ever did the assessment. I'm like, tenacity is my dead last. But here's, I want to be clear on what that means. It's not that I don't get things done. I mean, I'm sitting here with, a PhD, and I
Right.
obviously can get things done at some point or another.
Oh yeah.
But if I get involved with a project and I help with the idea generation at the beginning, and I help with discerning which idea for implementation is going to work best, and I'm not part of the team that actually sees it across the finish line, I am great with that.
Yeah.
And and this was one of the kickers for me. In American culture, that is kind of seen as lazy.
Mm.
It's easy to see somebody as, you don't care about getting the actual project done. Well, that sounds kind of lazy to me. And the reality is, it's just not how I'm wired. It's not that I can't do it or that I
Yeah.
won't do it. And it's just that that's not what I get most excited about.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, if I had a job where I was in the operator area, and all I ever got to do was put finishing touches on things, and I never got to be part of idea generation, I never got to be part of the discernment side of things, that's a job that would burn me out
Right.
quick.
But think about this, like, and again, the the widget is it's a much, the VOPS is missing that get it, like what Roger Von Eck would call the warrior phase. So
Hmm.
Roger Von Eck did Kick in the Seat of the Pants and a whack in the side of the head. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's got this great. So the stages of a project are: you start with exploration, you go to brainstorming, you go to discernment, or what do they call judging, and then the
Mm-hmm.
warrior phase, which is fighting it to completion. And that lines up really great with Lencioni's widget, that whole idea
Yeah.
of how you walk through these stages, because you have to know people that are discerners in the widget. You don't want to put them in a, like, in the same way you'd say, I don't need to be at the end of this thing to fight it out. I work best at the front. The discerners
Mm-hmm.
have no desire to be in the ideation phase. In fact, they will shut it down.
Yep.
They don't brainstorm, right? they
Yep. They
they
immediately
they
start
are the
shooting holes in all
they
the
are the
ideas.
pill in the brain, like, because in the brainstorming session, you're just playing with ideas, right? You're having fun, you're
Yep.
laughing, you're doing this. You bring a discerner in there, a processor, and it's like wah wah wah, like nothing happens, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing to be able to again. That's how we look at each other, instead of seeing other people as a flawed version of myself, right?
Yep.
I see them and me as a, a beautiful, wonderfully created creation of God, but we are limited
Hmm.
and small and underpowered. And this ministry is a team sport,
Yep.
not an individual event.
Yep.
That's
So
what
there's,
you
it's
read the
not,
book of Ephesians, right? That's what this is about. We're a
yep.
body together. And the ear, like it's so, the ear doesn't say to the eye, why are you here, right? Does
Yeah. And
the ear doesn't see the eye as a flawed version of itself.
yeah, but what Ephesians does talk about, and it's I think the only place in the New Testament this phrase is actually used. It talks about the unity of the faith, the
Yeah.
idea of we have to be in the business of working together
Oh,
to get things done. And so recognizing not a flawed version of self, but there's a complementariness to it
mm,
as well, right? That
oh
we
yeah.
are designed to complement one another, uh, to be in the business of getting done what the Lord wants done in
Yeah.
individual churches and in the church universal as well.
Hmm.
That we're designed to come along one another, come alongside one another as we are accomplishing that.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
So that's so good. So you with the widget thing,
Hmm.
how do you find that, get connected to that?
Yeah. So there's a couple things I'm going to bring up there. First of all, before we walk away from it too far, everything we were just talking about, you mentioned the idea of, you have that brainstorming meeting and you bring in the person who's really strong on discernment and maybe tenacity, and they're going to just immediately start bringing down the brainstorming meeting.
Yeah, say, what about this? What about
So,
that?
so this is a place to just, and this is kind of a side note. This is for pastors to just be able to understand. Uh, think about the purpose of your meeting.
Mm,
Like I talked about those elevations a minute ago, right?
that's so good.
If it's a 30,000 foot view meeting where you're thinking about vision,
Mm-hmm.
you need to clearly state this is what this meeting's about, because you know as
Mm-hmm.
well as I do, if we carry this metaphor a little further, if you're on a plane and we jump from 30,000 to 15 back to 30 back to 15, somebody's getting sick. It makes us
Yeah.
all feel a little bit nauseous, kind of getting jerked around like, what is the point of this? What are we actually doing
Mm-hmm.
here? And so setting aside what the meeting is for has value, and typically we don't do great at a meeting
Mm,
that moves from 30 to landing every single time. It's
yeah.
valuable to have meetings for a specific purpose,
Yeah.
and think that through. Where you find that, so I'm going to say a couple of things here. Number one, I found the book really valuable, and the book is called The Six Types of Working Genius. It's by Pat
Mm,
Lencioni.
okay.
You can find this information online at www.workinggenius.com, and it'll give you a link to the assessment. Now, within that, a person can also be trained to be a working genius facilitator. And I've actually done that training.
Mm,
And so here's a couple of things that come along with that, just for pastors, especially if you're a pastor in Missouri and you're listening to this. I mean, I guess I could do it by Zoom for a pastor who or a church who's farther away that's interested. But I can actually, I'm actually trained to help people, either an individual or a team, walk through where everybody lands on the team and what that means for the team. And it can
mm,
be either like a 2 hour or 4 hour workshop kind of thing. The instrument, the assessment for that, I actually get a discount on. So if it's something where you're interested in doing that assessment, if you go through me, I can actually help you get a discount for that. And this is not something, I don't get any kickback for that.
mm.
It's just something that I can do for you to help you to gain a little bit more understanding about who you are. And again, that's all at workinggenius.com, or you can connect with me through the Blair Center website, which is just
Yeah.
blaircenter.org. Um, but if you're a church and you're hearing this and going, I would actually love for that assessment to happen, get in touch with me. You can go through the Blair Center website and get in touch with me that way. And we can find a time for me to be able to come and help your church to figure some of those things out, figure out who your
Yeah.
leadership is and where everybody kind of lands and what that means for how you tend to function as a team,
Yeah.
strengths and weaknesses.
That's so helpful, Bill. And I think the thing you said is so critical. It's a small thing, but so critical, about making sure you tell people what the objective of our meeting is, right?
Yeah.
Is this hey, we're going to talk about where we're going? Or is this the meeting of, well, we know where we're going. We're meeting now to figure out what exactly we're going to do,
Yeah.
or is this a how we're going to get it done, right? Because then you get the right people in there. You're meeting. because that happens so often, right?
Yeah.
Meetings get derailed because they lack the clarity of purpose.
Yeah.
That was such a big thing that you brought up, Bill. That's awesome.
Well, and it's not, it's the meeting can lack the clarity of purpose. It can also be somebody who doesn't necessarily understand how they're wired, just wants to
Hmm.
get the meeting to something they see as important.
Yeah.
And to be able to recognize, okay, that other stuff has value. It's just not what I'm most excited about.
Yeah.
Right. And so being able to flesh that out well, I do think is important. By
Yeah.
the way, if you're listening to this and you're thinking meetings are the bane of my existence, uh, another book by Lencioni that you probably like is called Death by Meeting. And it
Mm.
goes through and talks about those different kinds of meetings. If you're having a vision oriented meeting, a strategic meeting versus a tactics meeting, and thinking through how those might work,
Yeah.
there's some benefit in there.
I think that, one of the great benefits, like I'm thinking about the team that we work with here at the MBC, and like we've got a guy, he's so good at discerning and getting things done, communicating. And in meetings, I can see, like, it's really great when you can be with a group of people and you're talking about what you're going to do and you're talking about a meeting, and you can say, hey, if you don't want to come to this meeting, like, no big deal. And that person's like, thank you.
Yeah.
Right? Because we all
Yeah.
know each other well enough and we know where we should be, and nobody gets hurt. It's like, well, how come I'm not a part of that? They're like, thank you for not wasting my time with that,
Yep.
because that's not what I like doing, right? That's the real benefit of
Yeah.
getting good. And here's the thing, I think a lot of leaders or a lot of pastors listen to this conversation, especially many youngers, go, that sounds just like a lot like business. And I, I don't think that belongs here in my church. And those things are like foreign to me anyway. I would encourage you that obviously you don't want to invest too much time in this kind of stuff, but anything
Yeah.
worth doing well is worth doing poorly at first. Don't think that you have to be great at this stuff. You don't have to be. There are people around you who love it and will eat it up and will want to be a part of what you're doing. If you just kind of lean into what we say, lean into the awkward
Yeah.
of this. Just ask the Lord, trust the Lord about what do you like. I'm hearing some things that like sound like maybe they would be important, but they they scare me, or I'm not sure I'm comfortable with it at all. And just ask the Lord to lead and guide you
Yeah.
over the long haul. Take a long haul view. You don't have to figure this out tomorrow. You've
Yeah.
got years of ministry to grow into this, and you will be surprised the people that are around you that are stronger and better than you. And basically, your job as a multiplier, moving from leader to multiplier, is making everybody else in the room smarter.
Yeah.
The freedom of the gospel is that I don't have to be the smartest person in the room. That is
Yeah.
so freeing, right? My job is to see other people, just like John the Baptist said about Jesus, he must become greater and I must become lesser. That's true of your people too. They
Yeah.
must become greater and you must become lesser.
So I'll tell you so you brought up a point there, and I want to touch on it briefly. And I know we're running long on time, but I think this is a good conversation. This is worth bringing up. So I'm reminded of, one of my colleagues here at SBU, Dr. Matt Kimbrough, wrote a
Mm,
book talking about, we do analyze, we do look at churches in a lot of ways when we think business. And what we really need to be thinking is the metaphor that the scripture uses, and that's family.
family.
Well, if I think about that and I think about family,
Mm,
if we're talking about just how stuff gets done, family needs to get stuff done on a regular basis, right?
yeah.
Like, it's one thing to have vision about where we want to go on vacation. It's another thing to have an actual boots on the ground plan for where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And then it's another skill set to actually do the budgeting and do the intentional saving of the money to be able to go. So,
Right. That's
all,
logistics, that's scheduling, that's
yeah.
finances.
And so the work that gets done, family does. And so and I'm also reminded, as you were talking about the enabling of others in the church, and you don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. I'm thinking about, as a parent looking at my kids, I'm really hopeful that someday when they get to be parents, they're better parents than I was.
Yes.
I'm really hopeful that they're even more successful than I've had a chance
Yes.
to be. Right? I mean, these are the same things that we think if we use the family metaphor for church, that we want to see growth, we want to see, encourage one another, building one another up, so edifying one another. This all still fits in
Yeah.
terms of understanding self and understanding others well to be able to
Yeah.
work together as best we can.
Mm,
It works just as well in a family view as it does in a business view.
yeah.
And so I agree. I think there are plenty of pastors who can get hung up on this is all, leadership 101. And that's not what I want for my church. I want to operate as the church. I'm not a business, and that's great. You should, but you also have work that you need to get done on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And if this helps you to cooperate well and to coalesce as a group, as a family
Mhm.
well, then it's well worth looking into. And so I just want
Yeah.
to give that final encouragement.
So I love the way that you used, I don't know if they're verbs or adverbs, but the church is a family that does business.
Yeah.
It's not a business. The church is not a business. It is a family that has business to do. And that's what we've been talking about. I think that's
Yeah.
so good. Dude,
Yeah.
this is awesome. Awesome discussion.
Yeah.
I love where this went.
Yeah,
This is
same.
good.
I wasn't sure exactly where it was going to go when we get started, but I'm really excited for our conversation. Jim,
Yeah.
thanks again for being on again. For all of you who are watching, thanks for joining us, and Lord bless you. And we'll have another episode for you next week. God bless.